Oh, okay, 2009 called It Wants Its Emo Hair and One-Sided Snakebite Piercing Back. Welcome back to my channel. If you've never been here before...
Where have you been?
Sorry. I'm Fat Sajak, and
where have you been?
I am, once again, sponsored by my pile of clean laundry that needs to be put away, possibly refolded at this juncture. Who's to say? I'm also sponsored by One Wonky Eye. Wonky Eye. When you want to look at multiple things at once and have a stigma that people will make fun of you for life. But enough about me. Today, we're going to be continuing our quest to relive the most confusing styles of the early 2000s as we ask ourselves the question, how soon is too soon to get married? And isn't that enough, babies? Yes, we're talking about Teen Mom again today. The sister show to the cautionary tale that was 16 and pregnant. Well, actually it's the sister show, because the original Teen Mom was the sister show. I live at the airport. Somehow Teen Mom always also kind of glamorized life as a teen parent, which I thought was a choice. So grab your super low-rise jeans, kids, because today we're going to take a hot, sweaty dive into the journey of one of the teen moms who just can't seem to stop popping out more kids in a revolving door of baby daddies. Today we're going to need you to fight with your significant other, get a weird lip piercing, and name your child something you won't call them, because we're continuing our evolution of teen mom journey with the long-awaited Kail and Lowry today. So before we get started, as always, just make sure that you're still subscribed to the channel if you were already subscribed, because YouTube is unsubscribing people because they are on a never-ending quest to be really annoying. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's your chance. Also, later's your chance too. Whatever, who cares? Make sure you like the video. Links in the description, ways to help the families in Palestine. Make sure you're registered to vote. Ways to follow me on social media. Please don't follow me in real life. My Patreon, channel memberships, merch, my Amazon storefront, which I just updated the other day because I bought a purse and I wanted to share it with you. If I can find the little picture of it, I'll put it here because it's super cute. And if you are interested, it was on sale. It was like $15 and it was worth every penny that I put on my credit card. So yeah, any of that information, you can find that down below, as well as any relevant links, etc, 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 etc. Let's just get into it. So we're gonna kind of go in parts because there's a lot of information where Kail is concerned where I don't feel like there was as much where the other teen moms are concerned, unless I was just feeling lazy and didn't really feel like looking into it. Kail has been my most requested teen mom to cover. And I think that's really interesting because I haven't yet covered Farrah Abraham, and yet everybody wants Kail's episode. So we're gonna kind of start with 16 and pregnant into teen mom, and then we'll progress from there. You'll see there'll be title cards like this one.
Oh, you're doing fabulous, honey. Hold my foot, Joe.
We were first introduced to Kail and Lowry, the season finale of the second season of 16 and Pregnant, which, if you are unaware, 16 and Pregnant was a show here in the States about 16-year-olds who were often 17 and 18-year-olds who were getting knocked up in high school, essentially. Essentially? Are you okay? Essentially. Kail got knocked up by her boyfriend Joe, who was in that era what some doctors might call a huge douchebag. The things I remember most about Kail's 16 and Pregnant episode was her desperation to make it look like she wasn't pregnant. So she'd be wearing like a bunch of oversized shirts. I don't know if you know this. You don't have to have been pregnant to know this. I think you just need to be able to look at a person, it's really hard to hide that you're pregnant.
So I'll be 6 months on Tuesday.
Soon you're not gonna be able to hide it.
I know.
I mean, indigestion can only take you so far, you know what I mean? Kail and Joe fought a lot, especially once their son Isaac was born in 2010. 2010? Yeah, 2010. January of 2010. Okay, I was right. Can't believe you doubted me. Anyway, Isaac was born in 2010, and eventually the couple split up when Joe mumbled something through absolutely pursed lips about it not working out. I don't know why Joe couldn't speak at a volume that could be heard in the early seasons, but you know.
I've been fighting a lot lately. There's constantly a problem. Just can't deal with this anymore. Just think we'd be better off if we live separately for a little while.
There were tales of cheating and such, but who really cares? They were children. Who cares? It really doesn't. In the grand scheme of things, Isaac's doing okay, so I excuse you. Anyhow, this breakup between Kail and Joe would leave Kail displaced, as it turns out, because her mom, Susie, is what some doctors like to refer to as a bad mom. And without the quotes, she can be referred to as a bad mom. Susie is unfortunately an alcoholic, which I'm not hating on alcoholism. That was a weird way to say that. I'm not hating on someone because they are an alcoholic. Addiction is 100% a disease, and addiction needs no further demonization. But God, she's the fucking worst.
She's always in a rush to go hang out with her boyfriend.
Oh, stop. Don't even start. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. So let me leave.
Turns out Joe's mom is Deece, though, and she let Kail and, of course, Isaac stay in their basement post-breakup, since she really had nowhere else to go. Now, Kail posted a TikTok recently where she did that trend where you're like, hi, I'm so-and-so, and here's something really traumatic about me, and I brought this candy, and you pour it in the bowl. She did that trend recently, and she referred to this as her mom signing custody. I don't know if she used the word signing, but giving custody of her to Joe's family.
When I was 16 years old, my mom signed over custody to my boyfriend's parents and told me that absence makes the heart grow fonder. And these are peaches.
I was just under the impression she was just kind of like, good luck. But I'm not sure about the specifications of whether or not that was like a legal custody situation while she was still underage. But during this time where Joe and Kail were split up, they still fought all the time. And because Kail is Kail, she started dating a guy named Jordan, who was her colleague at the time at the firm of Le Sports Authority. She kept this relationship quiet, the same way that like Kevin Hart tells a joke. And then we see on the show, after debating with her friend whether or not to make the relationship with Jordan public on one of the early iterations of Facebook, Kail opts to put her Facebook status as in a relationship, which would go on to infuriate Joe's dad, who for some reason is keeping tabs on Kaylin's relationship status on Facebook. So he confronts her about it. Actually, all three of them confront her about it. Joe's dad, Joe's mom, and Joe himself. And honestly, I remember viewing it when I was a younger human as something that was completely uncalled for, like an attack on a kid who made a choice, and being like really sort of annoyed for Kail because Joe was the one that broke up with her, and it's not like she had broken up with him to date Jordan. However, through the lens of an adult,
on Facebook it says I'm in a relationship. What does that mean?
That I'm in a relationship.
Oh, well, that's what that means.
You're in a relationship with someone other than Jonathan?
Yeah.
Just had a baby. You guys are living here.
Are you even considering or thinking about your son?
Did you really just ask me that?
You walk around my
I'm
house and
asking
tell
you
me you
can't be
love
alone.
me.
I still love you. Of course.
Well, I don't want to hear that if you with somebody else. That's my thing. If you with somebody else, don't feed me that. I don't want to hear it.
All right, Joe. You don't want to be with me, and that's what you told me, so I'm trying to move on.
You're trying to move on. How are you moving on? By getting involved in another relationship?
No,
you think that's moving on?
I told him I want to be
moving on
friends
is
with
getting
him.
an education. No, Kail. It's about the baby. It's not about you and Jonathan.
Well, I don't understand what the problem is.
You can see she's being disrespectful in Joe's parents' house. They're giving her and her son a place to live for free. And also, like, your son is still like a little glob of a person, so, you know, maybe give your vag a little time to cool down so it doesn't overheat. But if you do know anything about Kail, you know that's kind of not her thing. I'm not trying to slut shame her, by the way. Like, have all the sex you want. Like, go nuts. She's just got a lot of fucking kids, you know what I'm saying? It seems like she had a lot of trauma in her childhood. No real example of any sort of healthy relationship or just a healthy environment at all. So it does make a lot of sense that as a young person, Kail would make these sorts of errors and these sorts of choices, I guess would be a better way to phrase that. So eventually, after this is all found out, she promises to sort of not at all see Jordan anymore. She breaks up with Jordan. And eventually realizes that that sucks and she wants to date Jordan. She moves into her mother's house, but only briefly because, again, there are no healthy relationship examples for her. Her mom's boyfriend leaves her a note that basically says, clean up your shit, you're messy, just all the ways in which you wouldn't let someone else speak to your child. And you probably wouldn't speak to your child yourself. So Kail enlists the help of a local, what appears to be like a government assistance program, and moves out into her own apartment. And once she's in her own place, Kail is really sort of able to claim her independence. And by her independence, I mean start openly dating Jordan.
You don't deserve to be outside enjoying the sun.
What?
You should be in a cave.
So eventually Kail would go on to cheat on Jordan with Joe and then behave flippantly about it when Jordan was understandably incredibly hurt. Unfortunately for Kail, Joe was not like, hey, let's hook up and get back together. Joe was like, hey, I'm gonna start dating V. And Kail would go on to really hate V for a long time. She really kind of just hated V for existing. Pictures she found of them partying, allegedly when he should have had Isaac. But what she really should have hated her for, if we're gonna be honest, is agreeing to be in Joe's music video.
Combined, you so complete. Your pinky toe ring shining highlights your feet. Your city is your playground. Your voice is my favorite sound. I wanna lay you down like a track every time we meet.
Zoinks! Eventually, Kail moved on when she met the world's most annoying mouth breather, Javi. Seriously, like, that guy's gotta have bugs in his teeth, like, all the time. And in what seems to be about 5 minutes, Javi and Kail decide to get married legally, and Javi enters the Air Force, I think, is the branch he belonged to, and they decide that this is their plan. They're gonna get married, and he's going to join the military. It's going to provide benefits for all three of them. They have a weird aquarium wedding, eventually, which is a big ol' to-do, but not before Kail got knocked up with baby number 2, named Lincoln. She also moved from, I believe, from Pennsylvania to Delaware. I don't think there was anywhere in between, which caused issues with Joe because Joe does not live in Delaware. Well, he does now, but he didn't live in Delaware then. It seemed, looking at this with a different lens, it really seemed like Kail opted to marry Javi with the link of military stability or lack thereof, so that legally it would make sense for her to move with Isaac without a huge dispute from the courts. Nevertheless, they did go to court. The judge granted her the ability to move. They added days to Joe's visitation, and then Kail spat out another baby. A few things to note about Kail's relationship with Javi is it's always been rocky as hell. Like, I can't imagine the things we didn't see, but the things we did see, even in their good days, were not great. Javi was very, very, very controlling, but Kail is also incredibly sneaky.
Don't tell me you're not sneaky.
I'm not sneaky.
For instance, there was a situation where Kail received a text from a classmate, who we'll get back to later. His name was Chris. This is my understanding, that it was Chris. And it was a very generic text according to the scene in Teen Mom. And Javi was upset about this. So he wanted no passwords on phones. He wanted to be able, it sounded like, to pretty much go through her stuff whenever. She claims he was going through her computer, he was going through her phone. Very, very insecure, very, very clingy, very controlling. However, Kail is not an innocent, Kail is not, I mean, two things can be true. I'm not going to say Kail is not an innocent party, because being under the thumb of someone who is very controlling is not your fault. And it's not your fault because you are the perpetrator of something else. It's not your fault because that's its own situation. Kail, however, committed an act of domestic violence against Javi on camera, frustrated by the dogs in their home scaring their friends' kids and knocking them over and stuff. They had an altercation, and Kail grabbed Javi by the throat, basically, and pushed him.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. You can't just throw him outside and I just want to get
Meanwhile, in the scope of what was happening with Kail and Joe, Isaac was at Joe's for 6 weeks during the summer, because that's what their custody agreement called for. And while Isaac was there, Joe got Isaac's haircut, and Kail didn't like the haircut. And instead of just saying, "I don't like this haircut," she resorted to casual racism.
When he goes over there, you have him dress a certain way, you have him look a certain way, you have his haircut a certain way, and that's not who he is. I think you forget about the fact that he's half white and he's half Hispanic. Like, I feel like you dress him just in a stereotypical way, and I don't like it.
I don't understand what your description of how I dress him is. Like, you're not describing this is
like a thug.
I dress him like a thug. But you have the belief that he should not have a certain haircut because he's white, or
that's not what I meant, and I told you that.
Okay. That's why I'm here. I want you to explain to me.
Whether or not Kail thinks she's a racist for saying these things the way she said them, for saying these things really at all, it doesn't change the fact that that was hugely microaggressive and borderline macroaggressive. So one of the more frustrating things in the Kail Javi timeline for me was at a reunion show when things were particularly rocky between Kail and Javi. Dr. Drew, and just wait for my Dr. Drew episode. Once I finish all the girls, I'm gonna get to Dr. Drew. Trust me, I'm gonna get there. Kail was talking about, actually I think Kail and then Javi was like phoned in, and they were discussing the potential for their divorce. Dr. Drew sat down and laid the fattest fucking guilt trip on Kail about potentially divorcing the man in her life that, for whatever reason, whether or not a man doesn't make you happy, whether or not a man is abusive, whether or not you're abusive, whether you're toxic to each other, whatever the case may be, I don't think you should have to rationalize it outside of like the reason you give when you file your divorce papers. But Dr. Drew laid down this fat guilt trip on Kail that they should stay together and consider how that would affect Isaac. As if like a parent does not consider how the breakup would affect their children. Of course, you know, I will give Kail credit. She's had a lot of men come through. She's had a lot of kids. But where her actual first, like, one-on-one needs of her kids are, always seems to be met. She does seem to have a lot of emotional intelligence where her children are concerned. And to guilt someone in a situation that perhaps maybe she just got kind of the gall up to be like, yeah, I'm ready to get divorced. This was a hard decision for me to come to. To guilt her into it because of Isaac is just cruel and gross, and I hate it, and I can't wait to make a Dr. Drew episode. So in this time, Joe and V actually move to Delaware because Joe wants to be closer to Isaac, and poor V is just kind of strung along for the ride, and V would eventually shortly thereafter go on to become pregnant with their first and thus far only child. Now while Javi's away at a training, Susie, Kail's mom, resurfaces for some reason. We find out in one of the reunion shows that Javi was uncomfortable with Kail leaving Lincoln with her mom, which is understandable. Kail did it anyway, and she didn't tell Javi because she thought it would be fine. And when she came back, if I remember correctly, when she came back to get Lincoln, her mom was wasted. So from there, we really haven't heard much from Susie, except maybe in later seasons when she resurfaced via a phone call, but like, for the most part, that's about it. Eventually, Javi deploys, and Javi is not like on the battlegrounds of anywhere. No disrespect to the military or anyone in the military, because you're braver than I am, and that's fine. But every single time Javi deploys, he frames it as that he has to go fight the bad guys, when I'm pretty sure he just works in computers. Anyhow, while Javi's gone, I believe for like 6 months, we watch Kail sort of like figure out her life with the boys on her own, and things are still rough with Javi, which will eventually lead to a pretty messy divorce.
Don't tell me you're not sneaky on
I'm
your
not
phone.
sneaky.
It's my understanding that Kail was caught with Chris while Javi was deployed. It's also my understanding that there is a video that exists of Javi doing something nasty while he was deployed as well. So I'm just saying, everybody's gross. So this leads to, during the divorce and leading up to the finalization of the divorce, this leads to when Javi returns, finding Chris at their house and causing a scene and making some attempts to break into Kail's house, which would lead Kail to file essentially a PFA against Javi, which is an abuse of the system because she wasn't being abused. You know, his name was still on the house. He was technically still within his legal rights. I do understand her sentiment of like, I understand your name's on the house, but you don't live here anymore, so stop just coming over here, you know? But not enough to file a PFA, which Kail is well known to just willy-nilly file fucking PFAs, okay? I'm not saying she's never endured abuse in her life. I'm just saying she does often seem to use the legal system like it's her own personal... whatever. Kail gets knocked up again with baby number 3, who would be named Lux. Chris doesn't want to be filmed or involved. It's like Spanish Fly to Kail, I guess. And that's kind of all we really see about Chris, is we hear through these seasons that Chris isn't coming to this appointment, or he wasn't at this one, or I don't know if he's going to be there. I don't know if I want him involved. Blah, 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 blah. Put a pin in it. We'll come back to Chris later.
Not gonna do it for the cameras. Now, but before you watch.
God, this part's gonna kill me. One of the bigger dramas that has happened over the course of Kail's tenure on Teen Mom has been her feud with former Teen Mom 3, present Teen Mom co-star Brianna DeJesus. So they moved Bri to Teen Mom 2 after they fired Janelle. During this transition, Bri and Javi became a totally for real relationship. They absolutely dated. They were absolutely an item. It was weird. It was weird. And it really painted Javi in this really very disgusting light, that he was really trying to grasp any form of relevance that he possibly could. There was a moment where they were planning on going to Disney together and staying in like a big suite together. Leah at the reunion kind of fumbled up that information, gave it to Kail as they were sharing a room, which it's still weird, even if you're sharing a suite with a guy you barely know and You've got 2 daughters by 2 different guys. Like, it's just, it doesn't look the best. Again, I'm not slut shaming. Y'all go out and you do whatever the hell you want. Just be smart about it. So this leads to Kail and Bree having a lot of friction all of the time, including up at the reunion where they argued backstage in hair and makeup, where Kail was making a lot of weird demands. Like, she was really mad to be in a room with everybody else because her infant lunch wasn't vaccinated yet. Funny, we find out that Kail doesn't vaccinate any of her kids after the first 2. Anyway, so they fight backstage at the reunion. They fight on stage at the reunion.
You was talking with the bitch. Now you're not gonna do it for the cameras. Now everyone's here. You wanna act on time. You're an internet down.
And let's be honest, Brianna's sister Brittany is the real hero all the time.
Now you're not loud. I'm trying to get to you. You're going all the way around.
Eventually, this very real, very meaningful relationship of 4 minutes ends when Javi goes back to his sort of controlling and fame-seeking ways, insisting that he and Bree move in together and get married and all of those things, despite Javi living in Delaware and Brianna living in Florida. Brianna tells him to suck her dick or some other kind of nonsense, and you know, Kail is always right.
Kail is always right.
Sure, Jan.
However, Bree went on to win all the Petty Betty Awards when she actually sent Kail a treadmill. I know you're fantastic at running your mouth, so I thought your feet would run just as fast. And posted it to Instagram and obviously talked about it on the show. Kail would go on to Kail filed a defamation lawsuit against Brianna.
Oh, hey, hi, editing me here. I found this out while I was editing this. Apparently the defamation lawsuit came before the treadmill. Apparently Brianna was mocking Kail for being arrested for punching Chris in a domestic violence situation. So that's nifty. Okay, bye.
The lawsuit was eventually dismissed, and Bree threw a literal party on Teen Mom: The Next Chapter, which when season 2 comes out, I will make a 2-part for season 1 and season 2 of that as well. So if you're like a teen mom, you like my teen mom content, there's lots of it coming. Anyhow, so fellow teen mom co-stars like Jade Klein and of course the swamp monster Janelle Evans flew in for the party. Yeah, they literally dug Janelle out of the swamp for this. Which reminds me, we also need a Janelle update soon. We've got a lot of teen mom content coming. I think the most important takeaway from this whole like Kail and Bree saga is that they were fighting because of this guy. That mouth never closes.
Really? Is that why you tried to me on Tuesday? In the Wawa parking lot?
Something that I always admired about Chelsea, I know whether you like her or not, I know this is the Kail episode, but stay with me. But something I always admired about Chelsea is how recognizable her friends were throughout her tenure on Teen Mom 2. She kept mostly the same, probably racist, white people friends throughout her time on Teen Mom. Even the one whose husband ended up trying to pursue a 14-year-old, which yes, that is the nicest way that I can put that situation. And then he got caught doing it. And then her friend took like 3 years to file for divorce. That friend and her ex-convict aside, like all of Chelsea's friends in her Instagram stories that she posts now, even though she's not on Teen Mom anymore, they're all the same friends. They're all recognizable. And I feel like you can tell a lot about a person by the friends they have and the longevity with which they are around. Now, obviously, as we age and have children or whatever, like people drift apart, and that's natural, right? That's normal in life. And sometimes you have fallings out with friends, and that's natural too. But Kail, who is someone with very minimal family involvement, has always spoken of her friends as the people who are her family. Time and time again, she would argue with Javi, who wanted her time and wanted to pay attention to him and wanted to, you know, be around her 24/7. And she was like, hey, it's healthy for me to have friendships and relationships outside this marriage because I don't have a family. My friends are my family. And yet, as time goes on, there were dramas and fallings out with almost all of them. Even the ones that like were there from like her friend Mark in 16 and Pregnant all the way to like one of the last seasons, they had a falling out. You know, and this could be a direct result of her tumultuous childhood and minimal ability to maintain relationships of all kinds because of how little she saw good examples of that. When you're raised in trauma and you're raised in chaos, it becomes very, very easy to cut people off because you realize you only need yourself. I can relate to that. So it's very easy to kind of freeze over and cut people off that way. I'm pretty sure the only one that appears to still be around as of when she left Teen Mom was her friend Kristen. And I'm pretty sure that's because Kristen is on her payroll and was her assistant for a while. She even had a falling out with her nanny. Like, how do you have a falling out with your nanny? I don't know, just something to note. I miss Becky. She was my favorite. So when Kail sort of moved on, she got this new lease on life. She got a degree, which is wonderful. She's the, at least of the time, I don't know if that's changed since, but definitely the first of the Teen Mom franchise to get a 4-year degree, which is amazing. That's fantastic. That's what you want. That's I feel like the goal, that was the initial goal of these shows, was to show that, you know, despite having to grow up quickly, despite having to become parents quickly, that you can still achieve the things that you want to achieve, or whatever bullshit MTV sold us in the early 2000s. I know that Kail, I think marketing and communication, business marketing communications, that whole realm was her, where her degree is. She started a hair care company called Pothead Hair Care, which Janelle promptly set on fire once. Peace gathering. So she started that in 2018. I believe it was just CBD infused hair products. She sold it in 2021, 2022-ish. And then she started sort of beefing with Javi a lot. Javi began dating a woman named Lauren, who is the biggest pick-me I've ever seen. She's an Arbonne representative, and she was one that was willing to get knocked up pretty fast because she ended up having a child pretty quickly. During these times, like, Kail made a lot of like hush-hush statements, like things that should have been spoken about at a completely different time about Javi while fully mic'd and filming a television show. You know? Now, I've never regularly filmed a reality television show myself. But I feel like a backstage unmiked moment wouldn't be terribly hard to find. For example, the Wawa parking lot.
And you are gonna treat me like this? Oh, really? Is that why you tried to me on Tuesday? In the Wawa parking lot? While your girlfriend's home with your son?
What?
Yep.
Anyway, despite Javi being gross, Lauren is still with him to this day, and now they have 2 kids. I have zero recollection of their names, so we're gonna call them Spitball and Bubbles. Eventually, Kail would also find herself knocked up with baby number 4. Thanks to Chris. Way to go, Chris. You're the first one to do it twice. It was around this time that Kail says that her relationship with Chris was a huge sort of domestic violence situation of sorts. And since Chris doesn't film, we don't get much elaborating on that on really either side. Because one thing about Kail is when she doesn't want to film, she's not gonna. Imagine if you could go to work and be like, I don't want it today. Bye. Like, I know it's their lives. And I know that it's not just like business, it's literally their lives. And sometimes it would be grossly inappropriate to deal with certain things on camera. But the amount of times that Kail specifically has been like, I'm not filming about that. I'm not talking about that. I'm not doing this. Anyway, we did get this at some point. Cannot be unseen. That's the cool part.
You're trying to move on. How are you moving on? By getting involved in another relationship?
No.
Now, a lot of people really, and I mean really, really, really dislike Kail. And having seen a lot of her less than palatable behaviors over the years, I can understand that. But a lot of the more recent vehement disgust with her comes from her incredibly proud anti-vax stance. Now, as I understand it, her oldest son Isaac is fully vaccinated. Her second oldest son, Lincoln, is partially vaccinated, and the rest are just feral typhoid Marys. So much so that I guess on her podcast, Kail shared the story about one of her younger sons, Creep, I think is his name. Creed, not Creep. Her youngest son's, no, it wasn't Creep. It was the other one. Rango? I think it was Rango, who we haven't even gotten to yet, I guess had been exposed to what is assumed to be measles. She received a notification from Public Health or CDC or some such thing. And one thing about Kail is she's going to travel out of the country all the time. So they got this potential exposure while out of the country. How are you going to travel in and out of the country with 800 unvaccinated children? It's not even so much about like, I'm doing what's best for my kids. It's like doing what's worst for everyone else's. And listen, if you're an anti-vaxxer, I can't even be like, cool, do you? Because like you're fucking everyone over. So anyhow, I digress. Kail and V start a podcast, which is weirdly successful, called Baby Mamas No Dramas, which is the dumbest name I've ever heard. Second to her podcast with Lindsay Chrisley, which is called Coffee Convos, which is the whitest name in the history of white names. You might as well have called your podcast Mayonnaise. So Kail and Lindsay Chrisley have a podcast. Kail and V have a podcast. Kail and Kail have a podcast. Kail is just a podcast at this point. However, it seems to be quite beneficial, quite fortuitous. It has brought her a lot of money. I'm sure selling pothead hair care also helped. Plus, I'm sure it seems like she is incredibly frugal. She has talked about sort of the way that she puts money away here, puts money away there. She's got it covered. She's got her kids taken care of. Eventually, it sort of revealed that Kail has started seeing someone new who turned out to be her neighbor, Elijah, which of course, can you follow a pattern? Would lead to her fifth child, another son, with, I assume, a name. Rango. Isaac, Lincoln, Lunch, Creep, Rango. We're at 5. And we're not done. Hang on to your uterus. How many fucking kids are you gonna have, man? So she kept her pregnancy with Rio entirely under wraps and basically denied the child's existence until it was time to announce babies 6 and 7, twins, that she would go on to have shortly thereafter. Evidently 5 ended up in the NICU, 5 being Rio, ended up in the NICU, and I'm not sure why. Surely it's just a Google away, but I'm very tired and it's very hot in this room. And also it's kind of none of my business. And also, Rio is the one that had the potential measles exposure. So NICU be damned, we ain't vaccinating. However, the PI magicians known as the Teen Mom Hatters, who I adore and they crack me up, they're often found on Twitter. They're often holding all of these women accountable for all the dumb shit they do, which is... I love you all. They were on to Kail's pregnancy with twins long before she even announced it. They knew that she had had another baby before she said so. They knew that she was pregnant with twins before she even said so. If you were in the Teen Mom loop, it was a surprise to mostly no one. 6 and 7 named Verse and Valley. What's that? Oh, that's just their actual names? Okay. Would yield Kail her beloved, long-awaited baby girl. So for the love of fucking God, stop having kids, please.
Because I look messy, I look bitter, I look petty.
It seems like stopping kids is the plan for Kail. She and Elijah are, I guess, now engaged, and it seems like a healthy situation from what you can sort of gather. Though, of course, her departure from Teen Mom at the tender age of 30-something came just recently in 2022. So obviously we don't have much to go by except what's posted on social media, which is always real and very accurate descriptions of people's lives. When Kail left Teen Mom, in her final episode, she was on a sabbatical for a minute. I stopped paying attention, but I watched her last episode recently, and she was basically at a point where she was just like refusing to film anything about anything. She was claiming that she was being unfairly treated by the producers, by MTV, because they were always sort of like haranguing her about all of her kids' dads, and that she wasn't given the same respect as the other women were. And on that reunion episode, Kail decided, was just kind of like, yeah, I'm done, bye. She opened up about how in, I believe it was 2018 or 2019, she said that Chris basically almost ended her life. And then in true MTV and Dr. Drew fashion, we took a commercial break to see what Chris had to say about all that, because Chris apparently was filming in that season, and it's really important to get his perspective.
Hi, editing me here again. I just wanted to say that finding this while editing kind of changed my perspective on this part of the video a little bit. Not that I'm like, oh, we should definitely platform people who've been accused of abuse, but I can more so sort of see that Dr. Drew or MTV or producers, whatever, whoever was in charge of the idea to then bring Chris on and ask him about it, I can kind of see why that would be a thing, because it appears that this happened before the reunion, because the defamation lawsuit happened before the reunion. So I just wanted to clarify that, like, I still think it's gross and I still think it's weird and it's a mistrust of their talent's character. But this is poor character on her part as well. So it's altered my feelings a bit, not too much, but a little bit.
To spend the last over a decade watching essentially, no matter how shitty any of these women have been through the course of the show, they are still the protagonists of this show. Even Janelle would be considered a protagonist, an antagonist among protagonists, but still a protagonist nonetheless. She's the protagonist in her story. Even if she really is a fucking villain, she's still the protagonist of her storyline.
Oh my god, it's me again. Listen, I just deleted so many attempts of me to try to articulate something that I couldn't articulate. I think what I was trying to say is that I would have felt like it was a gross betrayal to have been working with people for well over a decade and then have them re-platform my abuser if I was making an accusation like this person literally tried to end my life. It's not that I want to point out what's right, what's wrong, who's right, who's wrong, that it's right or wrong to talk to anybody. I was trying to vocalize that if I were in Kail's shoes, I would have felt a betrayal by the network, by the producers, etc., for giving this person an opportunity to speak. But at the end of the day, I think they're both kind of not great. So that's what I was trying to say, I think.
It all just felt very gross. Let's sum up and end this, okay? According to Kail, her relationship with Joe right now is bad. They don't communicate at all, which is weird considering her podcast with V is doing so well. Her relationship with V is still good. Relationship with Javi is what she would describe as formal. Chris keeps leaking all of her information, all the important stuff, to be as equally petty as she is. Elijah's locked in for life, I guess. Only 1 out of 7 of the children is fully vaccinated, and I'm not sure if Chelsea has surpassed her by now, because for the longest she was cited as the richest teen mom with a network of roughly $4 million. Now, according to a simple Google search, they have her only estimated at around 25K, which I feel like is probably inaccurate. In closing, I will say that I think Isaac has surpassed Addie as the most iconic teen mom kid in the whole franchise.
Hey guys, today we are looking at my mom's past red carpet outfits. Oh my god. Why do you look so old?
That's it. I think I'm done here. I'm sure I missed a bunch of stuff. I'm sure you're mad I missed something. If you want to continue the discourse in the comments, do it respectfully, okay? It hurts my brain to remember this many things. It hurts my brain. And just you wait until my Dr. Drew episode. Heads are gonna roll. Grown men are gonna cry. I'm I'm gonna let the birds have their meeting now, and I'm gonna go. I hope you guys have a... just have a good one. Bye.
Why you tried to me on Tuesday? In the Wawa parking lot?
Apparently. Oh, it's like 9/11 out there. That was terrible. Don't make 9/11 jokes. You'll scare the kids. Are we having a meeting now? Right now? This is the time? I think one of them just swore at me. Is my bump high enough? Anyhow, this... I'm gonna have to scare away the birds. And I don't like doing that because I love my birds. But just know I'm doing this for you, person who called me lazy with my sound. I just said that. I feel like I just said that in the same cadence. Excuse me. Thank you. Lunch will be served shortly. Just give me a fucking break. What time is it?